I don't think McLaren wants to beat Verstappen and Red Bull in the championship. They bottled qualifying, they bottled the strategy, and they bottled swapping the drivers when it was necessary to do so. They're afraid to upset one of their drivers, and they're flat-footed on strategy throughout the race. McLaren is operating as a team that is not befitting of Formula One standards, and they're going to lose the Drivers' Championship because of it. Let's get into how McLaren made an absolute fool of himself at the Japanese Grand Prix. Hello everybody, my name is Michael, and welcome back to Last to First. All of these failures of McLaren are predicated by the fact that they have the fastest car, and they continue to have the fastest car race in and race out, but they are just continuing to not executing throughout the weekend. Both drivers made mistakes in qualifying. No doubt it was an absolutely sensational lap from Max Verstappen, but had the McLaren drivers actually put together their laps, then they easily would have been a couple of tenths clear ahead of Verstappen. Qualifying is absolutely essential in Formula One 2025, and McLaren are having a bit of a hard time with it. Specifically Norris, who continues to show some of his inconsistencies. At times he'll be hooking the car up wonderfully, and at other times he'll be way off the pace, and we saw that in full force in Q3. Oscar generally looked like he had more pace than Lando Norris, again, both in the race and in qualifying, but he himself also bottled it, so it's not entirely on Norris. While qualifying is essential in Formula One 2025, McLaren still looked poised to win, given it was a two-car versus a one-car fight for the win, and they had a bit of a car advantage as well. McLaren should have taken advantage of them having two cars in the fight compared to Red Bull's one, and I think McLaren just decided to remove their brain and set it off to the side when calling the strategy today. They randomly pitted Oscar Piastri as the first McLaren driver. Maybe it was to cover George Russell, but George Russell was quite a ways behind, and there really wasn't much to cover from him. Mercedes' early weekend pace really never came to fruition in the race, but Piastri also wasn't in undercut zone of Verstappen. He was a couple seconds behind, and of course he was behind Norris as well. So I really have no idea why they were pitting him. At first I was thinking maybe they're trying to get him ahead of Norris for some reason in the undercut in the pit stop zone, but it just didn't make any sense. And, at that stage of the race as well, Norris seemed like he had a bit of an edge over Piastri and looked like he might be able to take the fight to Verstappen, so not really sure why they pitted for Piastri first. Where the strategy really fell apart for McLaren was Lando Norris's stop. Despite him having a slight tire advantage at the end of the first stint, they called a dummy pit stop, which was very clearly going to be a dummy pit stop, and Red Bull did not fall for it. And then they pitted the exact same time as Max Verstappen. Now that just guarantees them to stay where they are and basically just to hold position. I genuinely cannot think of a reason to explain why they thought that that was a good idea. Pitting at the same time means holding position, no tire advantage, and no chance of the other driver getting stuck in any traffic. And it means no chances for safety cars or other red flag interferences to help benefit you. To me, it's an absolutely baffling decision from the McLaren strategy wall, and you'll have to let me know down in the comments below if I'm missing something, but to me it made absolutely zero sense, and I would love to hear your thoughts about it. While McLaren is the main one to blame over the course of the weekend, and they're the primary ones to blame for the strategy, of course, Norris is also to blame for just not being good enough this weekend. Like I mentioned before, he really bottled qualifying. He could have easily been on pole, and then he decided to go on his lawnmower and cut the grass trying to pass Verstappen in the pit exit. He was partially side by side to Verstappen, but he was definitely still a little ways back, and it made no sense for him to try to get that position in the pit exit. I think really any other driver would have backed out to avoid any potential damage, avoid going over the grass, and avoid the about 2 seconds that he ended up losing to Verstappen. They would have come out of the pits extremely close, and Norris could have made for a move getting out of the pits there. So it just didn't make much sense to me. It just shows the desperation coming out of Norris, and it shows in contrast how Verstappen is just staying cool, calm, and collected, and Verstappen is only 1 point behind Norris in the championship now because of all this. Now, the last blunder and the main point I want to talk about with why McLaren is just not being a really serious F1 team and why I feel they're just doing everything in their power not to beat Red Bull. and that's when they decided not to swap the drivers. It was very clear all race long that there were more times when Piastri was closer to Norris than Norris was to Verstappen. So all race long, Piastri was there or thereabouts. In the first stint, it didn't really make sense to swap the drivers. Nobody was asking for that. And while Piastri was getting closer to Norris than Norris was to Verstappen, it still seemed like Norris had a bit left in the tank to be able to go after Verstappen. However, with about 13 laps to go, Norris was not making any inroads to Verstappen. Piastri was well within DRS of Norris for the vast majority of that second stint. It looked like he had the pace to take more of a fight to Verstappen than Norris was able to do. There was a time during that last stint where Norris was around 1.5 seconds off, and Piastri was saying that we need to move things along, and his race engineer said Norris was doing all the pace that he had. That right there answers this whole thing about why they needed to swap the drivers. If Norris couldn't go any faster and Piastri was right on his tail, then they need to at least try it and see what happens. McLaren was being flat-footed, and they were just afraid to make a decision with that. They were too worried about upsetting their drivers rather than going for a race win. If they were to have swapped the drivers and Piastri doesn't get Verstappen, then they simply just swap the positions again. It was clearly the way to go and clearly the most fair thing to do, but instead they just chose not to do a single thing at all. It had the potential to at least give McLaren a 1-3 and get a victory, which they probably should have had from the get-go. Them swapping the drivers had the potential to make up for those mistakes in strategy that they had, but instead they just continued to be sleeping at the wheel. McLaren really need to wake up and realize that this championship is going to be lost by their decisions. While the constructors looks pretty comfortable for them, the drivers is all but comfortable for them, and despite Verstappen having not the quickest car by any means, he's only 1 point behind Norris in the championship. Also, who knows what's going to happen with the flexi wing clampdown in a few races time. McLaren need to be using their car advantage at the beginning of the season. That is how Verstappen was able to win the title in 2024, by building that up, building his championship lead up at the beginning, and despite McLaren's rally, he was able to hold on. This year, McLaren have the car advantage to start the season, yet Verstappen is only 1 point behind, and they're in for a proper driver's fight. So after that shockingly boring Japanese Grand Prix and some really big question marks over the McLaren team, let me know down in the comments below what you thought of the race and what you thought of McLaren's decision throughout the race. I would love to hear it down below. If you're interested, give the video a like and subscribe for more F1 content, and I'll see you all next time out for the Bahrain Grand Prix.